fill the majority of time here, but I do have a couple of announcements to make. Again, we would ask that you keep your computer on mute until we open it up for questions. We've got a couple of club announcements. I want to thank you to Greg Silver. He's our sponsor this month. If you're interested in sponsoring future months, please let us know. We do still have 2 openings for our foundation board. So if you're interested, please let Taylor know. By the way, we sent this out to the club, but if you're not aware, Taylor was diagnosed with COVID-19 along with her husband and her son. I don't want to speak for her, but I believe she's on the mend right now, but keep her in your prayers and your thoughts. We also have external community grant donations due here, or excuse me, applications due here. The deadline is September 1st, so if you've got a grant application, please submit that to us. Let's see. We also hope to feature some of our future members upcoming in our newsletter, so if you're interested, please, again, let Taylor or Tina know. We have suspended dues right now, so it's a good time to join Kiwanis and get a taste of what we're all about. And finally, made the decision yesterday that we are going to delay or postpone all in-person meetings through the end of my term, which is rapidly approaching October 1st. We looked at the CDC data, the Indiana data. We took your survey feedback as well. And so after October 1st, I'll leave it up to Eric Steele to make a decision from there on what we're planning to do. So those are the announcements I have. Taylor, did I miss anything? I'm told, yes, Greg Silver wants to be recognized as an environmental leader, attorney, and Butler advocate and supporter of Black Lives Matter. So again, thank you to Greg. Without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and get started. With our guest speaker, Rahul Dubey. He's actually got a U rather than a Y, but I'm honored to have him. For those of you who don't know, Rahul and I graduated from high school outside of Detroit, Michigan, many years ago. And we've recently exchanged text after I saw this story, but it's the first time we've seen each other. Rahul, in what? Not 25 years. We're not that old, are we? Or is it 25?
Oh boy, we just did 25.
It's 27. Geez,
we're getting older than that. We're definitely older than that, but it's good to see your face.
Yeah, so thank you. It's an honor to have him. And one of the reasons we've been excited about Zoom is we do miss meeting in person, but we've had the ability to bring in nationally recognized speakers. Rahul has been referred multiple times as a legend in recent weeks. So I don't know what that's like, but we'll hear more about that. So you've got a legend amongst your presence. But the board, we really wanted to bring about some conversations, given what's happened in recent months with social injustice, with race, with protests that have gone on, with Black Lives Matter, with really a lot of the social dynamics that are going on in our country. So Rahul has a very unique story that we're going to hear in a couple minutes, but I first want to introduce him. He, besides being a legend, Rahul is very renowned in the healthcare world. He is currently responsible for collaborating with C-level executives at his health plan, IDN, collaborating organizations as well across multi-institutional stakeholders to develop and implement innovative frameworks and unique approaches that lead to accelerated adoption of mission-critical initiatives that ensure the delivery of high-quality healthcare and improve consumers' ability to receive needed care, all while driving the cost of healthcare down. His most recent brainchild is the AHIP Innovation Lab based in Chicago's West Loop, and the quantifiable co-innovation methodology he and his team have proven viable across the ecosystem. He's responsible for the lab's one-of-a-kind concept and continues to fulfill its mission of delivering an invaluable resource for consumers, payers, collaborative and confidential solution working groups that involve individual payers, providers, and employers. Prior to joining AHP, Rahul had a leadership role as founding employee of a successful digital healthcare startup based in Washington, D.C., and along with the company's co-founders, he was instrumental in developing a multifaceted consumer tool, as well as leading the company's go-to market strategy. Rahul was recently named one of Smart Health's 2018 Excellence in Healthcare Transformation Award, the American Journal of Health Promotion's 2017 Innovators and Game Changers, and is recognized as Accenture Perspective Minds Driving the Future of Business. And in 2017, Frost and Sullivan presented him and his lab with one of their highest honors, their Global Visionary Innovation Leadership Award. Rahul lives in Washington, D.C. He's got a son, and he's a graduate of the University of Michigan. You know, reading all that, I feel I haven't done very much since graduating. So,
you know, hearing that, Graham, I haven't heard that in a while, and all I got to say is that's just a bunch of BS. I mean, it's a lot of PR. It's a lot of buzzwords, and one of the things that's been annoying me the last couple of years is the buzzword aspect of it. But I appreciate that the bio read-in, health equity and equality in healthcare and access to quality, affordable, and really kind of, you know, high-end access to care is something I've been focused on for the last decade, and you know, made what I used to think was making a dent. And, you know, now it kind of seems after the world has changed for me, June 1st, it seems very small. And I think we have a lot of bigger problems that are out there.
Absolutely. Well, I'll reiterate it at the end, but I'm proud what you've done and what you represent. Brother Rice High School, the best high school in the state of Michigan. And I think another thing before I turn it over to Rahul, although we're going to do a moderated session, great story of a family coming to America. I think your dad came here with $8 in his pocket, and I just love those stories. And I know Rahul has come to really appreciate being an American, which we'll talk about as we move forward. So what we'll do is I'm going to have Rahul. I'll moderate this session, but we'll go about 22 minutes, Rahul, and then we'll open it up for questions. And Rahul has told me, you know, there's some hard topics and some serious issues not to hold back on your questions.
Yeah.
Rahul, that's correct, right?
That's absolutely correct. I mean, listen, it's we'll get into it a little bit more, but if we're not going to be able to pull the curtain's been pulled back from me, and I can only talk about my experiences. But I think it's time to actually ask the serious questions. I'm reminded, and I can't create those questions myself, right? And innovating in healthcare, I always look at it as a collaborative effort to formulate the questions, Graham. Right. I think that's really the most important part is we haven't been asking the right questions. And I look to the audience and the Kiwanis Club and this amazing opportunity to be able to hear questions that I wouldn't generate or my homogeneous bubble wouldn't generate. So I really do appreciate this opportunity to be able to share a little bit of the story of the 70 plus that were in this house, the 197 that were right on the street here, and that tragically beautiful June 1st, June 2nd day here in Washington and all over the country.
You know, I know you're going to cover a lot of serious topics, but I do want you to incorporate how you ordered pizza for all 75 people. So let's go ahead and get started. We sent out the story with, you know, multiple news stories that went worldwide. So we sent that out in advance to our membership, but I'm going to ask you to start off with just giving us a synopsis of everything that happened. I believe it was June 1st. Give us a little bit of the background, and then we'll dive into some questions.
Yeah, again, thank you so much for having me and allowing us to tell this story. That's very important. I think it aligns extremely well with Kiwanis and what you have been able to do as your mission and your purpose and your members coming every day with children in their heart and how to make you know, your communities as well as the world and people you haven't even met a better impact on their lives. And I think that is the true definition of humanity. So thank you for that. Yeah, I'm a healthcare innovator, and I've been really focused on things from behavioral health and Medicaid to inefficiencies in fraud, waste, and abuse in medical billing, so I could reallocate those $28 billion in fraudulent claims to access to care in underserved areas, and really just working from C-level executives down, and have been able to work with some of the best leaders and minds in healthcare to really drive change. And on June 1st here, I live in Washington, D.C., a very privileged life. I'm not embarrassed to say that anymore. An Indian American who's very proud now, but at my Brother Rice days with Graham, you know, really ran away identity issues at being a first generation born in the U.S., culturally at home, being Indian, coming into a Catholic all boys prep as a Hindu and being the first one, definitely confusing. Who's Jesus? I remember saying that. That's kind of funny, right? Being born in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and then I'm born a Hoosier and raised a Wolverine, and I love that because it's the best of both worlds. And we used to go back to Indiana, and even in the suburbs of Chicago, of Gary and Munster, Indiana. So very, very proud to be back here. Graham, I do want to stress this before I go into June 1st one. He's very humble, and he did say that we exchanged text. About 4 days after June 1st, so June 5th, I received a card that said Butler University, and I opened it up, and there's a box of cards here. And it was meant to be. There's a lot of unopened mail here. It's about 5 pounds of mail. It's actually been giving me a good workout. And I opened it up, and I just thought, Butler University, this is cool. My son's starting freshman year in high school, so I should probably start thinking college. So I opened that one up. And I read the card, and it said, your actions on June 1st gave me hope, and I wish I had it available here. And at the very bottom, it said, by the way, I went to Brother Rice High School. Now, I've received a lot of messages from a lot of people that lead with, I know you from. And the reason why that card stuck me, and I actually texted Grant, is because he said it was all about how that moment made him feel. It was one of the most human cards I received, and he wouldn't say that. And that's why I texted him, is because he didn't lead with, can you speak in my keynote? I went to high school. Do you remember these days? It was that. It was love first. It was admiration first. It was something here. And every one of these cards, I'll be honest with you, I have very little hate mail, is like that moment. So let's go, Graham. I just wanted to point that out. You have an amazing leader here. I think you should expand term limits. No offense to the new person coming in, Mr. Silver, but that's just my lobbying, being based in DC.
One thing I will add, Rahul, is right after you reached out to me, I did ask you to speak. So I didn't give it much time.
No, but that's the thing. I wanted to speak. I looked you up. So I was actually, hey, maybe this would be the opportunity. And I want to actually just say that the humanity aspect of it, it was really important of June 1st. So getting that out of the way, just still focusing in a time of a global pandemic on telemedicine and working with hospitals on how to be able to treat people remotely. That was what I was doing June 1st. I also started a social impact program on accident in Medellin, Colombia. And I was pitching the Colombian Embassy and the World Bank on June 2nd for a sustainable agricultural play that we're doing in the Andes rainforest. So normal day for me, and it's June 1st, and I live in a beautiful place, privileged life in Washington, D.C., and Washington Springs are amazing. So it's a 3/4 moon, sky looks like it's right out of the Mediterranean, and I decide, even though there is a curfew, that I decide at 8:30 I'm gonna take a quick lap around because I wanted to clear my head. And at 8:30, I walk out, and there's the Temple of the Freemasons right down the street from me, about 2 blocks. It's a beautiful stone temple, gorgeous night. I took some pictures, and as soon as I walk back, no less than 10, 15 minutes later, there are 90 riot police at the end of our beautiful street in Northwest DC, which is in the heart of the city, but it's just this enclave of a perfect one-way street, connected row houses, no alleys, and very quiet. And all of a sudden, there's 90 riot police clad in gear standing there at the end of the corner. And I've been gone 10 minutes. And I'm like, what's going on here? So I walk toward my house. They've blocked out the area. I go to the officer and I say, I live right there. I need to get through. And he says, no way. And I say, please, I've lived here forever. I know something's going on. Can I just go to my house? It's the fourth one in. And he says, go ahead. And as I'm walking, I take no more than 5 steps. 2 guards put me into a wall, like almost just instinctually. And the guy who I was just talking to says, hey, he lives right there, let him go. And they released. They didn't say sorry. They didn't say anything else, but they were amped to go. And I just kind of looked around, and Graham, if you remember, I'm a little bit of a smart aleck. And I was going to turn around and say something. And I just was so bemused by the fact that I just walked into my house, grabbed a bottle of water, and came back out. And nobody is on my street at this time. There's a military helicopter 200 feet above the houses in the nation's capital, riot police of 90, and then there's cop cars all around. And it's just on my one end, and I can't see the far end about 400 yards down to my left. So this is to my right. And I see 2 or 3 people walking in, straggling, and they say, and they're holding signs, 3 more people, 10 people. And I'm like, hey, where are you guys coming from? They're coming from all over. And I'm like, why are you guys coming here? It's Swan Street. They're like, that's where they're telling us to come. And I'm like, that's weird. So I had a mother and daughter sit on our steps. I had 2, 3 kids with skateboards, or black young kids with boards in their hands facing these riot police. I'm like, you guys can put those in the front door here. And if I'm not here when this is over, you can just grab them. Another person put their backpack in. Another person wanted to charge their phone. Now, I take a video at 9:18 p.m. and I know this because it's one of the last times I touched my phone. And I sent it to a group called the Medellin Six. They're my inner circle. And I said, getting heavy on Swan Street. And I hit send. And Graham in the audience, about 30 seconds later, the street is filled up 3/4 of the way. And to the right of me, about 30 yards, I hear boom. And I look up and I see pepper spray. And I see this military brigade marching just slowly, like to a cadence. There's some sound that's coming like a rhythm. And I just see a sea of people just, the only way I can describe it is fresh in my mind at 2 a.m. when I described it first, was a human tsunami of people just spilling out from that point on the corner. And I fling open the door and I look at the mother and daughter, and it's funny now replaying it in my head so many times. I looked them dead in the eye and I said, I whispered, which was weird. I said, get in the house. And they said, what? And then I started screaming. I flung open the door and I'm like, get in the house. And I'm perched up on my stoop so I can see down, and everyone's running away. So their back is toward this brigade and I'm seeing it coming. And I just keep yelling, get in the house now, hurry up, get in the house. And I'm holding the door open, it swings out. So I'm outside of the house and I'm holding it open and I'm holding the railing and straddling the stoop. And about 3 deep is just pouring into the house, and I see people getting clubbed. I saw a woman get trampled, and a young black 25-year-old, 30-year-old reached down to grab her and was pepper sprayed in the face. I got pepper sprayed. I'm 6 feet above the ground and 10 feet away from the sidewalk, and I'm getting pepper sprayed on the left side, but adrenaline's kicked in. All I know is my eye is itching and my arm's kind of burning, but I'm holding it open. And finally, this brigade's coming at about 5-10 feet every 20 seconds. So imagine it just moving slowly. And people are pouring in, and there's more pepper spray, and there's more riot police coming. And all of a sudden, the brigade passes my stoop. So it's come 30 yards, and there's nothing in its wake. And I see the last person coming up my step, and I follow them back. I remember this perfectly. I put my hand on his shoulder, and I slowly nudged him inside, and I closed the door behind me, and I locked it. And that was from 9:20 to 9:30 of pure pandemonium and screams that I have never seen in my entire life. And I'll call that Act 1, okay? That was, evil has always existed in theory, okay? It's from the Bible and my studies of Brother Rice to the Gita in Hinduism to news cycles, you just see it. But I have never, ever once in my life admitted to the fact that there's pure evil out there, because I didn't know. It's always doubt as a defense mechanism. And what I saw that night was pure evil, validated, and it scared the crap out of me. And I walked into this house, and the first hour was pure pandemonium. You're sitting in the room that this basically behind me is the first view I saw, because the door is right across from me. And I walk in and I see pepper spray in the house, a 6'9" black man built like 290 on the floor in fetal position with his hands over his face, rocking back and forth, crying because he's in pain, and milk flying everywhere. I didn't even know I had milk in the house. And I like to travel a lot, and I love going. One of the favorite things is going off the beaten path and getting things. And one of the things I got in Bali last year was a gift from someone I went on a pilgrimage with. And he bought me he's a woodworker, and he carved this amazing statue out of a single piece of wood for me before I left. This was the first thing I saw on the floor broken. And my ottoman was flipped over and milk was everywhere. And I scanned the room in 5 seconds, and I went, it's amazing, because I'm proud of myself, because I'm a little bit of a materialistic person. And I said, all of this can be replaced. And it was 0.5 seconds, and I was down the steps getting solo cups. It was all instinctual. And after that hour and a half, and during that hour and a half, I saw people wiping strangers' faces with milk, making baking soda mixture, getting waters, consoling people, strategizing, locking the doors, controlling everyone on 4 levels and outside. There's 100 people in my house, and I've never met them, and they've never met each other. And immediately it was into, not out of my way, it was, what can I get you? There were pods of people around those affected and the victims that were clubbed, blood, bruises, ice, everything's going around. And after that hour and a half, I've never witnessed humanity and beauty and America like I had for that 6.5 hours that took place while we were under siege. And don't just say that they got in the door here and everything was fine. The police were trying to get in the front, the backyard. They broke down the back lock on the fence. Everyone was calling. They knew, because they knew I was the homeowner here, that I was the only one that was able to talk. There were 70 plus people ranging from 16 to 55, disabilities, Black, Hispanic, white, South Asian, gay, straight, and they were all coordinated, I don't know, telepathically to begin with. And what happened was, they're asking for Sharpies. They're writing bail bondsman numbers on everyone's forearms, okay? They asked for my information. I had a stack of new business cards. I'm handing out business cards because there's rumors out there that they broke into my house. So they're getting on Twitter and they're asking me to record a message that you didn't break in. They were so coordinated in a crisis situation. And here's the beauty of it. I've never had a work day or a school day or any day where someone has not annoyed me minor, or I haven't turned my shoulder and been like, that's dumb, right? I mean, it just happens in your everyday. And at that moment, there was 70 plus people that did not know each other, maybe 2 or 3 knew each other, that did not argue once, did not fight, did not break anything, asked if they could Venmo me, where are paper towels so we could clean up. Now, if they were looters with suspicious activity on a peaceful street, why is my house still standing? Why is the only thing broken is this, which I kind of like the severed head. It looks so much cooler, right? You just kind of hold it up and be like, yeah, it's very warrior-ish. But I love it, is that's the only thing. Why am I still in touch with them? Why did they, 2 weeks later, I have these notebooks around my house, and just innovation ideas that I scribble down, and I open this up, and looters and criminals do not sign their names to things. They all went around and put in all their contact information. This, by the way, is my new Declaration of Independence. But I'm saying to you is that what I saw out there was pure terror. Pure terror. And it was intended genocide. There is not, I've been going back in my head and educating myself thanks to my new friends in terms of civil rights movements and things like that. I understand, even back then in '68, they were given the opportunity to disperse. There were made announcements to please go home. Guess what? Everyone on the street was on their way home. 68 to now, it's getting worse. We're getting bigger, we're getting more diverse, and I love that. It was 65% Black in this house, 35% other, white, whatever we want to call it on those boxes. We're getting bigger, we're getting more diverse, and they are getting more proactive. They didn't ask us to go home. They stopped us from going home, and then they tried to get in my home. But what happened was this diverse melting pot of America, and granted, we are in the nation's capital, and it might not be the same composition as Indianapolis or Indiana or Detroit, okay? But I can tell you the hearts and souls and the sentiment and the moral absolutes are exactly the same as Graham and I's. Whether it's skin tone, age, generation, sexual preference, or whatever, I can tell you universally, as I have learned through world religions such as Catholicism, Christianity, Hinduism, Buddhism, Judaism, the universal values are there and they were represented here. And the Kiwanis Club is perfect for me to talk about this, because when did we stop learning from our children? The most valuable thing I have picked up in the last couple of years has been my work in Colombia on accident, working with 20 and 30-year-olds down there in a different culture. And then the 70 plus that I continue to keep in contact with here. They've given me that education, and never in real time have I seen humanity rise to the top. But now that I have, now that it has been quantified, Graham, it is our job to be able to show that in these dark times, and it's been dark for a long, long time, right? That humanity automatically, intrinsically, innately rises to the top when we need it to. So as I'm working in the corporate boards, and you read my bio, one of the first things I say jokingly is get rid of your crisis communication team and hire about 5 interns, because they can handle everything, because they did. They were handing me phones at 2 a.m. to talk to lawyers, to talk to journalists, to talk to people that could help us. I looked around and it was such a panic type thing. I look at what my son's able, I have a son, and it helped to get into that dad mode, really. And, I look around and I'm like, how am I going to get food here? Right. That was the other thing, was like, we're under siege. This was militarily controlled, under siege. And so, I mean, I've been luckily a local DC guy. Sorry, I have to plug in. So I'll change the lighting in just a second. But, in Washington, D.C., and being a Washingtonian now for 17 years, my son and I have been ordering pizza from the same place forever. So I'm also like very, very much use my phone all the time. So I ordered it on an app, which is Grubhub Seamless. And then as soon as I hit send, because it's a behavioral practice, I'm like, wait a second, there's no way this delivery guy is going to get here. So I called them, and because before the technical advancements, I knew the guy and he knew me. And I was like, hey, this is Rahul on Swan. My number pops up. He's like, hey, brother, what's going on? I'm like, it's crazy here. You have to send us pizza. We're under siege. He goes, I know. I go, no, you have. I didn't think the rest of the world knew what was happening in this microcosm of our house, but everyone in here was tweeting. So it picked up live with 2.7 million viewers while this was happening. So the pizza guy knew, and I couldn't get my head around the fact that he knew what was happening. So I was like, you have to come down the alley. He goes, we already mapped it out. I got you. I go, you don't understand. We're under siege. And he's like, no, we're watching it on TV. We'll bring you the pizzas. We'll come down the alleyway. And so I ordered 6 pizzas, and it took about an hour. They hijacked our pizza. Finally, we were able to get it over the back fence. We ordered another round of pizzas. Once people knew we got pizza, neighbors started ordering pizza. We had more pizza than we could think of. It was amazing. In the morning, breakfast bars were brought. Blue Bottle coffee, which is my favorite, was brought. I even made a joke when I was carrying the jug in. I was like, I should have you guys over every day. You'll save me a lot of money, And it was just really, once we made the decision, Graham, that everyone was going to stay here we stayed at about 12:30, a little bit past midnight, when we realized that they were waiting for everyone to get out so they could arrest them for curfew violation, is when we actually said, all right, 6 a.m., no one moves. You're obviously, allowed to leave, but I don't definitely suggest it. And grab some square footage and let me know what you guys need. And, I just every 10, 15 minutes would go from floor to floor. Just seeing these pockets of people just talking from, anything from, it wasn't, F Trump or, F the police. It was, one of the things that really got me was, oh, I can't believe we got caught. I can't believe we went, like, where did we go wrong? Next time, they were talking about next time. It was great. It was in the bathroom. There were 3 strangers talking about next time we should go up 16th Street instead of 14th Street. They were ready to go. It was amazing to see that pocket, It was amazing to see a Jewish kid with a South Asian kid with a black kid talking about Tupac. That's amazing to me, right? I wanted to stay there the whole time because I know nothing about Tupac, but I know they do. And it inspired me to know at that moment around 1, 2 a.m. that this was not something that we would get. 6 a.m. was our goal. Like, that was the number one thing, is get to 6 a.m., everyone gets home and everyone sleeps in their bed. And that shifted as soon as they walked out the door. There was a feeling of a commencement. Like, this was the beginning. And it was immediately this just chill that just hit me in terms of these 70 people, right? They're going to go back to their neighborhoods. People were asking me, they're like, are you going to have them back here? I'm like, of course I'll have them back here. But this isn't the central location. 70 people just went through something that are going to go back to their neighborhoods. And that is true power. Everyone talks about neural networks and, the network effect and all of these other things. We just absolutely did it based in the face of terror. And not only that, I received a card yesterday from an 11-year-old named Charlotte in Australia. Australia, that's 6 continents now that this is hit. And it has nothing to do with the feel-good story, and it has nothing to do with Rahul Dubey. I was a microcosm, right? I was a contribution to that night. What's continuous is this movement. What's continuous is the 5 pounds of mail, the 78 bouquets of flowers, the metadata that I look at in healthcare, the data underneath the data to make it more complicated, right? What is it really telling us? Not the metrics that we measure in terms of enrollment, donations, and fundraising. What 20-year-old owns a pen and sends a card? That's amazing to me. What 11-year-old a world away, right, sends a card? That's amazing. Having 25, 30 people walk by and take pictures, and then I open the door because it's a pandemic and I'm lonely, and so I talk to them for like 20, 30 minutes. There's some amazing souls that are out there, and we just lost that connection. And that's why I know 6 weeks later that there is something here, that it wasn't just a feel-good story, that it's resonating with people. The injustice, universal, whether it's Black Lives Matters, whether it's defund the police, it is a matter of people wanting to return to humanity. And I think I felt that in healthcare when we got some traction in the last decade, where people were like, enough is enough, making care delivery very difficult on people is not, morally acceptable. Okay, but now I am the person that is walking down the street and sees a police officer and I freeze. That's frightening to me. And so I had to go in and do some introspection myself. And Grant, I want to wrap this up to Q&A. I honestly think, and I look at this the way that I have to, and this is just me, I am racist number one. Okay, and I have to go back to the basics and understanding of not my childhood, because that was infected with cognitive bias and racism, right? And I need to address that in myself first and educate myself first. And I'm truly embarrassed, and it started already, where I took a train to Atlanta with two 20-something-year-old Black men, athletes and musicians. We took an overnight train to Atlanta, and I learned about their music and their authors. But get this, I get to Atlanta, and all of a sudden, I always thought Dr. King was from Birmingham, Alabama, and Martin Luther King was born in Atlanta. So we walked to his birth home. I'm 44 years old, and I never knew that the civil rights leader of our time was born in Atlanta. But I know where Mahatma Gandhi was born, because I'm Indian. Jesus, all these things. And I said this on an interview very early on. The reason why I say this is two things. One, I set up a social initiative in Medellin, Colombia, in the poorest neighborhood in South America, using WhatsApp and Google Translate and taking trips down there. Yet I don't know a single person that lives in Ward 7 or Ward 8 of my own city. Okay, that's the crazy thing about that. The second aspect of it is, when we're looking at this, is as I'm looking at it kind of like as racist number one and addressing this, is that everything I know is wrong, right? And I need to be able to, and I said this, is proof of that is I know more Renaissance painters from 400 years ago in Italy than I do of civil rights leaders of 40 years ago in my own country. Wow. And I thought I was progressive. So it starts with me, Graham, and I can tell you that the return to humanity is definitely one thing that I'm taking away from here, is that humanity aspect, that love, that very Christian thing that we talk about so much and that was instilled upon me, okay, is not something that's finite. Work projects, project management, emails, all those things are bandwidth. But the funny thing that I learned is with love is that the more that you give, the more you're capable of giving. It's not finite. You don't draw up. If that was the case, what I'm doing in Colombia is amazing, and I love the people that I'm doing there. If I would have made that decision of I'm already doing enough, that's a conscious decision. But when you start loving openly like that, without cognitive bias, without stereotypes, without bigotry, which I'm trying to do, it really does become infinite. And it's the number one thing that I can take away from this, is that how much it's changed me in that regard of knowing one, that evil exists, and two, knowing that love is infinite and that it can absolutely squash it, because it did on June 1st and June 2nd.
Outstanding. Really appreciate you sharing more elaborately. I'm gonna do some rapid fire questions, Rahul, and
Yeah.
I've got several, and then I really wanted to open up to our group. So, are you okay keeping these maybe to 45 seconds as we go through
would
these?
be great. Thank you.
So you said we didn't have to ask softball, so I'm going to start out with maybe a curveball or a fastball. I know you got a lot of positive responses, but I'd imagine you got some, because the protests have been varied, and you touched on this a little bit. We've seen really violent protests. Unfortunately, we've seen, damage to cities. We've also seen very peaceful protests, but I'm curious if you, in all the correspondence you've got, if you got Hey, Raul, you're part of the problem. You're sheltering people who have created violence.
Yeah. There's definitely been some of that, very small. And then also I noticed that so I got a few pieces of hate mail, 3, they broke the law, and you broken the law too. None of them are signed, and they were all typed. So that told me something. Actually, what scared me too was ATF, Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, is a government agency, knocked on my door and called me a domestic terrorist. And that's frightening, but I know that that's part of the intimidation MO, internal affairs also. A little bit on the social media side, but most people see the injustice of, if it was a violation of curfew, then why didn't they just let them go home? Right? I mean, they weren't in violation of curfew when they started this circus of tear gassing and clearing the streets, right? And not that I'm saying it's causal, but you're asking us to play by rules, and I just don't engage in that type of behavior if they can't see those type of comments, if they can't see the injustice that was there. It didn't warrant it, right? You could say that about Rayshard Brooks in Atlanta, who stole a taser. A $40 taser is worth someone's life. I mean, I think that's where we are in the problem of it, right? This policing military mentality of force and fear first is always going to lead to events like this, and it's getting worse.
Yeah, I'm going to ask one more question, then we still have some really good questions coming through. I'm just curious about the logistics. You had 75 people in your home who stayed there overnight. How did you handle the logistics in addition to the large pizza order?
It's when you're in those, I mean, I definitely couldn't host comfortably more than 6 people in this house. But that's why I said grab some square footage. I rolled up some sweatshirts and some t-shirts, and people, some stayed up. People were power napping on my on my kitchen table, somewhere in the corners of the bathroom, somewhere on the couch. A beautiful moment I gave a mother and daughter that were the first ones to sit on my son's room, so they could sleep and make it private. And I came back 20 minutes later, and there were 6 people on the floor in there. And I was like, guys, give them some space. And the mother got out, lifted her head off the pillow and said, no, I invited them in. Sorry, Graham, I think I lost the audio.
Yeah.
Okay, got you.
My technical issues at Brother Rice. Can you discuss why the peaceful protesters chose to break the announced curfew?
The announced curfew was at 7 p.m. I can't address that. I can tell you why I broke curfew. I broke the curfew at 8:30. I walked out at 8:30, and I was an hour and a half past curfew. The protesters that were on my street were all coming from a White House peaceful protest that was dismantled with use of force, and there's humanitarian legal measures coming up against that at around 6:15, so before curfew. And so that chaos led to a panic and everyone kind of dispersing. There was no planned protest. This wasn't a planned protest. This was people just like me who took a walk, and they were leaving the protest before curfew, where they were corralled intentionally onto this street that has no exit points whatsoever. So it was definitely staged. Had they had let the people go, they would have gone home.
Next question, how do you feel about the defund the police movement?
I've learned to comment on things that I can comment on. So I haven't, and this is before even in healthcare. There's a lot of complexities in healthcare, as you can imagine. I am not there yet. I can tell you that I'm seeing in my beautiful neighborhood, in which I have done, my son and I take walks and play baseball in the park at Lafayette Park by the White House. We have ice cream shops, just like everyone does. We don't get in our cars because I don't have a car. The ultimate irony being from Detroit. I live in the city. And what I can tell you is there are cops on every corner. There's sirens reflecting off windows 24/7 in this house for no reason. Not because of me, but even 3 blocks away. There's a police presence everywhere in a neighborhood that doesn't need police presence. So I don't know where I'm at on the defund the police. I can tell you I've done a lot of work in mental health and behavioral health in healthcare. And when you send police to mitigate a bipolar schizophrenic episode, it does not end well. And so I'm looking into that. I can't, I'm not an expert at this, but I definitely don't want to speak to something that I can't. I can say that I'm sure just with everything else, there's a lot of redundancy and inefficiency and waste that happens in the police department. And I think we should look into that.
Please continue to submit questions via the Zoom. We will ask them all. We won't shy away from them. While we're waiting on those, I've got a question about the media attention, Rahul. Can you speak about how many corners of the world you had requests from? And I watched several of them. You're very articulate as you are today, but how comfortable were you with telling the story?
Thank you for that. Let me go with it. What happened here, it started DC local news. That was planned. We knew we needed to get the press on the sidewalk at around 4 a.m., 5 a.m. before the morning news cycle, because then they wouldn't be able to put us face down on the pavement like they were doing to other people. And so it started the local, and then that picked up on national June 2nd and June 3rd. And then you can see the progression. BBC World UK in London picked it up on the 3rd day. And then it went through Europe on that 3rd day. The 5th day, India picked it up. And then Singapore picked it up on the 7th day. And then, and that's still going, you know, and that just speaks to, you know, in India, I was talking about this brutality aspect of it and how it's universal, but it's not human. And I think it's what we have to do is go back to, I know from 95% of the people, because I know 5% of the world, evil does exist. I saw it. But 95% of the people is that you follow your heart. So that's what I think is resonating across the 6 continents that we were able to touch. And, you know, now with Australia and that letter with an 11-year-old named Charlotte is very moving. And I think that, you know, how comfortable I am, when I saw the atrocities that were happening and the inequality that was happening in healthcare, fixable, man-made, you know, it was very easy for me to talk about it once I learned about those things and continue to learn about those things. And what I learned in building an innovation center that was really honest and focused on, hey, let's not just say wellness and let's not say disease management. Let's get into addiction with the poor in inner cities and get real about it. And so when I got here and started talking, you know, in front of this episode of my life, it was really just being able to talk freely. And when I did, I think, one, it felt right to me, and I'm not playing to an agenda. It's easy to talk about things that happen to you and when you're truthful. I don't understand why politicians want to spin. It's hard to spin, right? If you go out there and speak your heart, you never need to keep a track of what you've said before. Just go back to that inner voice in your heart. And if people want to judge you for that, let them. They're not your people.
Okay, we've got about a little over 10 minutes left, so I'm going to try to get through all the questions. My good friend Alex Kaur is on the call. His mom is, who passed away last year, one of the most well-known Holocaust survivors, and his father is also a Holocaust survivor. He asked, considering the Deshaun Jackson, Stephen Jackson anti-Semitic comments in the last week, how can all of us come together in the hopes of not alienating any group? And he says, by the way, you may know Nissim Rubin, an Indian Jew in D.C.
Okay, I'll take a look. You know, I think one of the things, if we can go out back to our moral absolutes and our moral compass. And I think if you see that, whether it's with Rahul Dubey, who's a Hindu, went to a Catholic prep, Miss Rubin, who's an Indian who's Jewish. You go to my pseudo-adopted little sister, Rabia Chaudhry, who's Muslim. If you go to Graham, who's Catholic, I think you're still Catholic or Christian.
I'm Episcopalian. That's Catholic without the guilt.
Okay, good. I'm a Reformed Hindu. I like cheeseburgers, so it works out well. But if you go back to your moral absolutes, if you go to that universal code, if you also have to go and look at it with empathy, okay, where a lot of people are speaking and social media has made it, you know, for a lot of ways better for us to get content and to produce our own content. But we also have to understand that not everyone is like us, and the backgrounds that they come from are very, very different. I know mine still confused that I need to be white, because that's what I was always taught. It was never conscious of me. It was just, that's who my leaders were. And so, you know, I also understand that my parents are still alive, and I have a very loving, amazing sister who is a role model to the world. And so when I approach it and I make my comments, as Graham said, in an articulate way, that's what's expected of me. And if anyone should, if not me, then who? I've had this silver spoon in my mouth, and I should be articulate and be able to handle the media. But there's other people that haven't. And I'm learning, the 70 plus that were here. And what I'm empathizing with is, yeah, they're doing exactly the best that they can with what they were given, which is almost better than me. I know it because I was taught wrong. And I think the way that we go back to it and we look at these personalities is that when they map it back to their moral absolutes, and when we apply empathy and map it back to what they're saying to our moral absolutes, then something's right. I'll give you an example on this. I received a letter from the Metro Police Department saying that they filed a complaint on my behalf on them, which I thought was very funny, that the police department filed a complaint on themselves for me on that. And I was just like, I'm not going to talk to them. That's BS. But then the other side of it is, maybe there were a lot of police that were out there. Maybe there was an officer that saw some injustice and filed that. And that's a really hard thing for me to do, is to look at that other side because of the oppression and because of the violence. So I know that's longer than 45 minutes. I think it's really important to incorporate that empathy side rather than what we just know, and then try to map it back to the values and the universal love that is in our religions and our everyday.
Okay, I hope you forgive me, but now I'm going to ask you to go to 30 seconds because we have so many good questions, and looks like we do have some sliders and curveballs coming your way.
Okay.
So when did you learn that the reason for the dispersing of the crowd was so the president could have a photo op, and what was your reaction?
It was, I did not know it was a photo op. I thought it was the dispersing of the crowd early. It was about 2 days later when I knew it was a chain reaction of what happened. And I just could not believe. My first thing was, oh my God, I'm living in Colombia in the 1980s. And that's exactly what it felt like, was that I was living in a third world military run dictatorship. I'm sorry, you're muted again.
Yeah. Do you believe Black Lives Matters is just about Black folks, or is Black Lives Matter an umbrella under which business, churches, sorry, this question's cut off, are all things Black? I'm not sure I quite understand that question.
Let me just comment on that. Like the issue is Black Lives Matters, right? Of course, all lives matter, but the issue that we're talking about is Black Lives Matters. But it's also, what I would ask people to do is just to go back to just injustices as well, right? And injustice anywhere is injustice everywhere if we look at it that. And I'm looking at it as approaching this in a macro level, you know, with me being racist number one. And looking at it and saying, okay, you know what? Yeah, of course, Black Lives Matter, but I'm not going to get into the weeds on all lives matter, Black Lives Matter. Of course they do. The issue at hand right now that we're saying and that are on the protests are Black Lives Matter protests. And so, you know, if you don't want to get involved in the protest as well, I look at an ally as someone who's not going to get on our way and is going to cheer.
Okay. Can you speak to why things turned violent? Some say that there were people placed in communities to make the peaceful protests violent.
It was definitely instigated. The victory for us here on Swan Street, and I'm speaking just to Swan Street, was the fact that we didn't turn violent. They wanted us to turn violent. I can tell you, I would have turned violent if I was trampled. I know that for a fact. If I could see and I wasn't pepper sprayed, I would have hit back because it's the only thing I could have done. It's a natural reaction. They did not say disperse. I can tell you there was not a single bottle thrown, punch thrown, or anything from the peaceful protesters except for their hands in the air. And that's the response that I have, is that it was intended to cause a riot because they wanted to catch it on the news cycle. And I will take that with my own two eyes. I knew exactly what happened.
Okay, some of the systematic injustices that we're seeing can be found in our healthcare system.
Yes.
Can you comment on how you have seen these in the U.S. and how future healthcare workers, practitioners, and people behind the scenes can build trust with underserved communities?
You know, it has to be with the underserved community. So I've done this with behavioral health and Medicaid. And I do. And I've actually been, the last 4 weeks, I've been on the phone with the CEOs of major organizations that I work with. and I've actually canceled 6 of my contracts, paid contracts with them, because they will not accept the fact that, you know, it's posturing. I remember proving out 98,000 lives for behavioral health and Medicaid with a company called Valera Behavioral Health, and we worked on it for 3 years. And we pulled it off in Albany, New York, and Eau Claire, Wisconsin. And I took it back to the board and said, all right, we can get this to scale. And the response was, let's go into Medicare Advantage. And, you know, so you see that as inequalities, you see it with drug pricings, and you see it systemically through the supply chain. If you see the racism that's taking place and the bigotry and the exclusion of ethnic groups in clinical trials on the pharmaceutical side, the drugs work, but they're white males that are in these trials. It's not a makeup of females or, you know, blacks or Latinos or South Asians that are in these clinical trials, and our genetic makeup is different. So there's just an astronomical amount of injustice and racism in healthcare, and we're working on that.
Was anyone that took refuge in your home carrying or showing any weapons? Also, we recently experienced a riot condition here in Indy. Was there any talk about violent response? I think you've covered that one, but was there anyone?
No weapon, no.
Okay.
Peace, signs, eye wash, goggles, face masks.
Are you convinced that the USA has the solutions but is afraid to implement changes?
That's an amazing question. Yes, I absolutely know that we have the solutions. This is not invention. This is a matter of what I call frugal innovation. The pieces to solve these problems exist. We need to roll them up, and we need to do so immediately. We do not need to invent. We do not invent the answers. I talked a little bit about the questions early on. It's the questions we ask. The answers exist.
Can you share some tangible, easy ways we can be part of the solution, part of the heart and kindness of serving others, how to change our perspective and mindset, or how to step out of our comfort zones? This was a great session. Thank you.
Well, thank you. One thing I can say is that you're well on your way and further than most. I mean, with the mission and pledge of Kiwanis and working with children, filling in gaps that are cornerstones for their morality as well as their futures. One of the things that I noticed wasn't the middle upscale type of neighborhood in which Dr. King was raised and born. But what I noticed is there was a church on the corner, there was a library less than a block away, there were homes that had manicured lawns and the streets were cleaned, and that on the note of the house, every day that family had dinner together.
Awesome. We've got a couple thank yous, but I think these are the questions, and we've got 3 minutes left. So I'm going to wrap up. First of all, Raul, I want to thank you for your time. And I hope when you talk about all the organizations, CBS, MSNBC, all of the organizations, BBC, very prestigious, that you'll actually list Indy Kiwanis at the top as being the most prestigious that you've spoken to. I want to say too, on a personal note, I'm very proud of you. I think what you did took guts, and because, again, and I viewed our screens today, and I viewed the questions, and I understand there are differing reactions and there are different viewpoints, and these are really sensitive issues. What we're trying to do here is have those hard conversations. I know people feel differently, but the one thing I know is that you love this country and you have a servant's heart. And I got a note here about you were lucky to go to such a great high school. And I think we both feel strongly about that. When we were 14 years old, we had a service requirement for, I think, 15 hours. And usually the 14-year-olds are complaining about that. And why do we have to do it? But I think that at least in you instilled those values. I probably wouldn't be in Kiwanis without that requirement, which some of you may lament me going to Brother Rice High School for joining this club. But we had those values from a young age, and I think we really feel fortunate to do so. I think also one of the comments I really liked is that you hope your son takes these lessons and can emulate some of the peaceful protesters who stood up for what they believed in. But I think at the end of the day, in my mind, what you did is you showed courage and guts in doing this and having a selfless attitude. And we look forward to following your story. as a thank you for having us, we are making a donation in your name here in Indianapolis to Big Brothers Big Sisters, which I think is very appropriate, given that.
Very appropriate, Grant. That was a Brother Rice one that I used to be part of for our service. It just gave me chills. It was the first freshman where we did Big Brothers Big Sisters, and we also did I think it was disabled athletes as well, was one of the first ones we did too. It was Special Olympics was one of them.
Absolutely. So we're going to make that donation in your name. We're going to send you the certificate. Again, that organization serves children of all colors, backgrounds, and ethnicities. So
Thank you.
I hope you all enjoyed the program. I thought it was fascinating. Again, some hard issues, but we want to have those hard conversations. We're at 1 o'clock, so we ended right on time. As a reminder, the Kiwanians, if you want to stick around, reflect on the presentation, share what you're doing this weekend, great. I apologize, I can't do so. I'm in a hotel right now in Lexington, Kentucky, and on my way to West Virginia to see a donor. And by the way, Raul, I told Raul my thank yous. I'm going to have him as a guest at the Butler-Georgetown game, assuming we have a season. And
I hope so.
I'll be sending you some Butler gear to wear rather than Georgetown. So
I would love some Butler gear. Thank you very much, everyone, truly. And I mean, it's an amazing story. It's going to continue on in other avenues. You're on Instagram, it's Rahul Dubey, Swan Street. But it's a story of this 70 plus and really excited to seeing that. And, it's just a time to, if we can look at this rather than defund the police or Black Lives Matter, if we can raise up to humanity and look at these things as subsets to humanity, I know that we can return to that. And so thank you very much, Graham. It's been wonderful to reconnect, and I'm looking forward to our journey together moving forward.
Awesome. Thank you all. Feel free to stick around. Hope you have a great week and a great weekend.
An amazing story.
That was fantastic. I feel like we all need to do a little more, or at least me. I won't speak for anybody else.
I don't say this as a commercial for United Way, but all the stuff that we've been doing, we've been seeing that there's a huge need to help educate, especially us white folks, on why we are where we are and the disparities that actually take place. And we put together a 4-part series called The Roots of Racism.